when you get your audit entries, we want to be sure that you're looking at those because, yes, we're going to do them because your auditor says that we need to adjust these numbers. But if they are affecting cash or your receivables or payables, we want to make sure if those need to be reversed. So it's just a question because you may know that, well, the auditor is doing it to make it get in balance, but which ones need to be reversed? We'll look at over-under billing adjustments, and then at the end, we'll have time for your specific questions. So understanding the file structure, and in most of the modules, there's a few that are a little bit different, but most of them have a new file, a current file, and a history file. And just make sure everybody understands that any one particular module, whether it be general ledger, job cost, even accounts payable, if it's in the new file, that means that it is not posted to that module. So if it, for instance, came from payroll, it might be posted in payroll, but if that transaction is sitting in the new file in general ledger, it is not posted to general ledger. So you wouldn't be able to balance if we have anything sitting in the new file. The current files in each of the modules hold all of the transactions that have been posted. And they would have been recorded to the master file of that application. When we're looking at the history file, nothing moves automatically to the history file. Those are ones that when you choose, and that's one of our things that we're talking about here today, is moving transactions to history. That's when you decide that they are old enough, and based on your parameters that you give it, you want them to move to the history file. It does multiple things for you. If they're old enough and you don't want reports to always be having to look at all of those old transactions, it will speed up the reporting process because you're only selecting the current file to look at. So the report will run a lot faster because there's, not as many transactions in there. But if there's, let's say if it's in job costs and there's a particular job that was closed and you want to report on it, and those transactions were moved to the history file, then yes, you would need to pull the history file to be able to report on those transactions. So that's the basic file structure in most of the modules within Timberline. So the difference between moving to history and archiving, moving to history is just going from the current file to the history file, and most of y'all, when you're running reports, when it is a transaction-based report, you see when you're getting ready to run the report, it says, do you want the new, current, or history? And you select which ones that you want. So if they're in the history file, they are readily available to pull up on a report. You can look at them, do whatever. They are in your live data folder, the folder that you're in with all of the current company transactions. When we talk about archiving, we are moving transactions and, let's take for instance jobs. We're moving the job and all of its transactions to a different data folder. We're archiving it. Back in the old days when everything was on paper and we cleaned out our file drawers at the end of the year, we would take those files and first we'd put it in the storage room within our office. Well, that's kind of moving it to history. But when you take those, when they get past maybe, 4 years old, whatever your cutoff time is, and you take those boxes and you put them out into the to the, I don't know, they call them connexes or whatever, those metal buildings that are outside, that would be archiving because you're putting them into a totally different area. They're getting really old. So that's what the archiving is. We're putting it into another data folder. We can still get access to them. We just have to go to File, Open Company, and choose that archive data folder. And then in our file structure, you're going to see what that looks like. There's going to be different folders out there. So, and this is, in my opinion, this is my recommended archive folder structure. We have, and I guess I didn't put it on here, we'd have at the top, it would be, if you're looking in Windows Explorer, we could have, your particular company name and then archive files. Within that, we'd have one for General Ledger. And the subfolders inside a General Ledger would be fiscal year end of 2016, 2017. And those folders contain a complete copy of your entire data folder. And that copy would be made when you are done with your adjusting entries for that prior year. So you've actually closed the year the first time you possibly, you've done the close year, you've sent stuff off to the auditor, they've come out, done their audit, they give you adjusting entries, you open up the year, put those adjusting entries in, and you close that year again, and you are complete. You are not going to change, take for instance the year 2016, you are not going to change it anymore. You're done. At that time, make a copy of your data folder, and we put everything in this fiscal year end of 2016. Because I know when you run financial statements, it only goes back into the previous fiscal year, but it does not go back prior to that. So if you ever want to report on it, you're actually going to switch over to these archive copies, and you can print the financial statements as often as you need to and go back into that folder. So that's a historical copy at a given point in time for the general ledger, and it will never move from there. Then the next folder within the archives is for your jobs. So if you have project management, then the project management jobs and the job cost jobs all go into this same folder. So the important thing is that the PJ jobs get moved there first, because it sets certain things up in this folder when you move the PJ jobs. So if you did the job cost jobs first, then tried to move the PJ jobs, it would tell you that that folder is not set up for that, and so then it would have to be put into another data folder. So you want to move PJ jobs first and then the job cost jobs. We don't need subfolders in this because it would be harder to track to find out what folder your job is in that you're looking for. So I don't recommend any subfolders. It's just all the jobs and the transactions go directly into that PJ job cost jobs folder. And just important to remember to, if you move the jobs, move the transactions over there also. A lot of times I see people that have moved jobs, but they forget to move the transactions, and that's just, it keeps just a lot of transactions in your live data folder that you don't need there. The accounts payable and cash management can go into one folder, and we would call them 2015 because we usually move those about every couple of years. But in 2015, checks that were dated in that year and before, we may not move those until maybe towards the end of 2016. But you want to date the folders to know what's in there. So those would be checks dated on or before 2015, and then we do it in a couple of years. So then we would have in the 2017 folder, it would be checks dated 2017 back to 2016. So that could be every 2 or 3 years that you decide you want to move that stuff. The important thing to do is that, yes, we're going to move the invoices over there, but we have to have a copy of your current vendor master file and the bank master files. Because if you decide to remove vendors or delete some bank accounts, if you remove the vendor, we wouldn't know these invoices what vendor they belong to. So we put a copy of the vendor and the banks over there into that file, and then move the histories invoices over there. In payroll, generally we have a copy of all of the payroll files, and we usually do that just before we close the year, so that that archive copy stays in that particular year. And so we'd make it at the end of 2016 and then each year. So if you want to move the transactions into a history file, you can do that in your live folder. So in your current file, you would generally have the current year that you're in. So right now we're in 2017. So there wouldn't be a whole lot in there, but it's going to build every pay cycle. But from 2016 and prior, it would be in the history file. The very important thing to remember on moving checks to the history file is you cannot move the checks to history until you've done the W-2s for that particular year, because there are certain reports that it looks at the history file to do. The 941 preparation report, I'm sorry, that you can pull up on both of them, but there's some, the W-2s and Atrix, when it's calculating what it's supposed to be, it does not look at the history file. So you want to be sure that you don't move anything to history until after the year has been completed and you've done the W-2s. So in moving transactions to history, where we do that at is, I put the XX, that's whatever module, job cost, general ledger. You go to the module, tools, move transactions, current to history. And then it would give you the option for a cutoff date, or by conditions, you can put a cutoff date out there. And so this is moving it in the particular module and just moving it to history, so it is not being archived. Then each module kind of has different requirements of when you would move transactions to history. So in General Ledger, for instance, we go by the fiscal year. So whether that be, March, June, September, or if your fiscal year is at the December, that's when you would say, okay, when I'm done with my audit for, let's say, 2016, that might be coming up here in a month or so, you'd be done with the audit. You could move transactions to history for anything before 12/31 and before. Move those to history. Then in the current file, You just have 2017. In job cost, you can move it from current to history if the jobs are closed. So if the job is still remaining in your live data folder because it was just being closed this year, then you can move those to history. Some people choose to move them to history, others just wait and they just archive them at the end of the year when they're done, but they just leave everything in the current file. So that's your choice, whether you move them to history or just keep it in the current file until it's time to archive them. For payroll, usually your current calendar year is in the current file, and prior calendar years are in the history file, because payroll is calendar year driven, so it doesn't matter when your fiscal year end is. And then accounts payable and cash management, I always try to keep those together, because when you're doing inquiries on accounts payable invoices and looking at the check, it's looking at the cash management file. So those two, we keep them in sync as far as moving stuff to history. And we do it every few years, 2 or 3 years, depending on your volume. So if I choose to move paid invoices to history, I'll use a certain cutoff date, and let's say we're in 2017, so I might move from 2015 and before to history in accounts payable. Well, I would do the same thing with cash management on moving, it moves it by bank statement date. So I would move the same thing, use that same cutoff of 12/31/15 and before, moving those to history. And another thing to keep in mind about accounts payable, when you move invoices to history, and why we only do it every couple of years, is because once that invoice has been moved to history, you can't make any changes to the coding. It's only when it's in the current file, and cash management is one of those that the current file is actually called a master file, but it does have a new and a history, but current is actually known as the master file. Let me check in with y'all. So I unmuted everybody. So is everybody good so far? Any kind of questions on that you have no clue where it is that you do this at? So I guess everybody's good.
Good.
So, all righty. So I will keep going then. Okay, so now we get into archiving the jobs. So one thing you don't want to do is archive these jobs and remove the transactions before your audit is complete. Because if they're trying to reconcile transactions and job costs to the general ledger and stuff, you don't want to have those moved out. You want them in your live data folder until that audit is done. When you get ready to move the jobs, in your mind, yes, it might be complete. You're done with it. But a recommendation is that you do not archive it until that job is on the completed contracts list from your auditor, because they don't put it on that completed contracts list until all of the AR has been received, retainage is billed, all of the AP has been paid, and there's just no more activity to be done on those jobs. But when it is on the completed contracts list, the auditor says this job is done. we're not going to have any more transactions to it. And I'm sure they would appreciate it if you don't make any more transactions to it, because then on their side they have to open up the job and add stuff to their numbers. And so once it's on their completed contracts list, if you move it out, then that job won't be changed anymore. It kind of safeguards that job from any more transactions. So I would go by that completed contracts list to say that that's going to be the driving force of when we archive jobs. So the order that you want to do things in PJ is just PJ Tools Move Jobs. And so it would bring up a screen and you go in and you can click a box to say that you want to move these. And it does move everything within PJ. There's not transactions out there in PJ. All of the cost transactions and all, they still reside in job cost. But it does move all of your submittals and RFIs. It moves everything with that job just in the one thing of PJ Tools Move Jobs. Then you would want to go to Job Cost Tools Move Jobs, and you can check the box to move commitments, and it moves the ones that are charged to one job, and it's based on the jobs that you move. So I would definitely say to check that box. If you don't check it, it leaves all those commitments in your live data folder, and then now you have a bunch of commitments out there that the jobs are not there. So you check that box, and then you would use ranges, or you could do conditions to select the jobs to move them. And so if you're going by that completed contracts list, it's probably definitely the easiest to use the ranges, and you're just going to highlight the jobs that you want them to move. Then after the jobs are moved, you go back into JC Tools Move Transactions, and you're choosing either current to current. So in your live data folder, if you chose not to move anything to history, you're just keeping it in the current file until you archive it, then it would be a current to current move. So it's current file from your live data folder to a current file that you'll create in that archive data folder. Or you move history to history. If you did move them to history in your live data folder, so they're sitting in your history file now, it's going to move them to a history file in that archive data folder. But if it's a mixture of both, I mean, it could be you have to move them from current, and also you'd have to move them from history. The easiest way to move things like that is in conditions, you say that the job is equal to blank because you've moved the jobs first. So then you could just tell it, if you don't find the job there, I want that transaction to be moved out. So the first condition is that, I'm sorry, let me clarify that. The condition that you want to put onto it in your ranges, you would go to the job record, and I can show you all this if you don't understand this, is that you go to the job record and say that the description is equal to blank, because it's going to go look at the job master file. That job is not there, so then obviously it has no description, so move all those. And then the second condition that you would put on there is that the job on the transaction is not equal to blank, meaning because it does hold general ledger transactions out there in that file, so we want to only move job related stuff. So those are kind of the two conditions, or you could use ranges and just go in and select all of your jobs again. If there's not a ton of them, you can do it that way, but if there is a ton that you have to move, then just saying that the description is equal to blank, and it'll do that selection for you. So the reversing entries after the audit, when you're making those adjusting entries that your auditor has given you, you want to watch out for anything that goes to cash, accounts receivable, or accounts payable. Most of the time, that might be just an accounting function that he wants to do because maybe he knows that there's $50,000 of revenue that you're recording in the year, but you didn't have a big invoice that came in against that. So he may put an entry to accounts payable, but we would want that type of entry to be reversed, because in the next year then we're going to be getting that entry, and we don't want to get our accounts payable out of sync with our subledger. So just looking at what kinds of entries, why is he doing it? If the description is to balance it to the AP ledger, then that one would stay. But if it's to record some invoices that haven't come in yet and he's just putting a lump sum entry out there, that you would want to have it reversed, because then you're going to be balancing just fine throughout the next year without trying to figure out why is it all of a sudden out of balance, and all it is because the auditor made some entries to it that need to be reversed. Another entry that we make is over under billing adjustments. This one I usually call it a three-ring circus, because we're making a entry usually to an asset, then we make an entry to a liability, and the difference in those two would go to the income statement. And those can be made monthly, quarterly, or yearly, just depending on what the practice is in your office, how often they're going to research what their over under billing status is. One thing, I don't think I put it on here, was the WIP report that you use out of Timberline. Make sure that it is counting retainage as part of being as the billed amount, because we want to work off of gross numbers. And I know that there's one of their WIP reports out there that the amount billed, it takes the billed minus retainage, and we can easily change that report to not have it minus out the retainage. So when you're looking at your WIP report, whichever one you're using, just looking at that total billed, just make sure that it is gross and not net of retainage. Another thing that I like to do is that the adjustments on the income account here that we're using, that it is not your real income account, because if we're balancing our actual sales to the general ledger, we want that income account to be pure for only your sales amounts. So we might have an income account of $4,000, and our over under billing adjustments we might have out there is like $4,099, just to make it a different account that houses these over-under billing adjustments. I think in the long run it makes it easier for reconciling, and then when you're looking at a statement you can see what the total amount that you've adjusted this year's income statement by, because it's in a totally separate account. When you make those entries on this last statement here that I have, we're going to make it, let's say it's October 31st. We make the entry October 31st because that's where we do it. In that case, it would probably be monthly. So when you make that entry in General Ledger for the over-under billing, in that same journal, that same batch that you're entering, so you have 3 lines on that journal entry for dated October 31st, stay in there. The next 3 lines, make them November 1 and reverse those entries, because then you know that it's done. You don't have to do any posting of, reversing entries or anything, or worry about getting that document out again to see what you had made. Just go ahead and post it for the reversal the first of the next month. You put that adjustment paper away and you're done. You don't have to get it out anymore, because that over-under billing adjustment is good for that one day and that one day only. Some people, I know, they make an adjustment, so like whatever their amount is at October 31, maybe November, they might tweak it and adjust it. Some people, you can do that. I like personally to put the entry in, reverse the whole thing back out. Next month, we'll take a look at it again. Then you put the whole entry in and take the whole entry back out. It's cleaner, and you can see that it was in and then it came back out. And again, that's just my personal opinion. So that's over-under billing adjustments. Okay, so that was all of my stuff. I have y'all unmuted now. So was there anything, first of all, that you want me to go into the software to show you that you don't know where something is? I'll give a moment for that if anybody wants to speak up. Okay. So was there any specific questions that anybody had? Okay. No questions. Is there anything else that anybody wanted to know? Anything?
Linda, I didn't see any questions in the chat at all.
Okay. I don't think I've ever had not one question. So y'all are still out there, right?
Yep.
Okay. I finished up. I saved time for it, so like there's about, well, almost even 20 minutes. So I just want to make sure that y'all got out of it what you needed.
Linda, there is one question just came in. It says, how do you close an archive billing and contracts?
Okay, let me see if I can. How do you close archive billing?
Archive billing contracts.
Okay, so I think what they're talking about, you can move contracts to history. So Leanne, I hope you don't mind me calling your name out. You want to just let me know what you're asking there? I don't know, I think she's still on here. But in accounts receivable, you can move stuff to history, and then also on the contract side, you can move contracts to history. So when you're moving the job to history, you can look if you have contracts on those jobs, you can move those to the whole contract, move that to history also. So I know that wasn't on my listing, and I apologize that I left out the AR stuff, but let me just go over there real quick and show you. I'm sorry I didn't have this up before. Is everybody seeing my desktop over here? Carrie, can you see my Sage?
It's Tina,
Car
and I don't see. It says waiting to view your screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me make sure.
There you go.
Okay, it must have clicked off. Okay, now can you see my Sage?
Yep.
Okay, all right. So in accounts receivable, it's tools, and then we current to history. So on AR, the thing I have to add about that is that print out an aging before you move anything to history, an aging that balances to the general ledger, and move your items to history that you want to move, then print your aging again and make sure that it's still the same. Because I know that, sometimes you might have to pull something back from history, and then you have the option of history to current. So just print the aging, move the stuff to history, and then print the aging again. And in contracts, in the contracts module, it'd be tools, and it's moved closed contracts. So the contract itself has to have a status of closed or paid in full. So if you haven't been doing that on your contracts, see, these all have a status of approved. Even if they've been, that they're done, it wouldn't move this contract. It has to have a status of closed or paid in full before it can move them. Okay, so let me come back here. Okay, so we were getting some of the, can't see anything, so sorry about that. It must have clicked off of there. So does that answer those questions there? Okay. Any other questions that anybody has? I mean, it can be about anything. If there's anything else, since we have the time, other people may be interested in it also. Okay. No questions? Right, well, we finished up on that one early then.
Good job.
But
Thanks,
also,
Linda.
you're welcome. I just wanted to let everybody know, I guess then you're going to be putting the link to this email.
The presentation and a recording.
Yes, and so I guess you're going to be sending everybody the how to get to it then?
It'll probably be a couple of days.
Okay, all righty. So in a couple of days, you'd be able to have access to this PowerPoint on the OnPoint's website, and you'll be getting an email on how to get to that. But I appreciate everybody attending, and hopefully that I answered everything or explained everything well enough. But if you have any questions on moving anything to history or doing any kind of this stuff, please, feel free to contact me or the consultant, ask questions to the consultant that you've been working with.
Thanks, Linda.
All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.